Hello everybody, it's Matthew, or meachew a peach. I'm just going to be playing some games while listening to multiple music. It's probably not going to run very well, but I don't care. I'm here to have fun and talk a little bit about some LDS stuff. Because my streams are pretty relaxing, and I like how I have multiple audio. So just give me a little bit. Okay. Oh shoot. Because this is due to the fact that I uploaded a tweet on X or Twitter, which is now called X. The reason why I did that is because I did it. I did it because, let's see if 720 works. I did it because I think a lot of LDS people don't know how to justify our own beliefs very well at times, and I think that we could do a much better job at articulation and stuff. Plus, if you don't know how to argue it in, I guess the correct way or something, you're probably going to be lost. And so, it might not work. It might not be as good as, you think. Like, uh, people are kind of too much self-confidence. So I said I might have to upload a voiceover saying stuff about how and why I think the LDS Mormon theology makes sense. So I'll probably game on this game for a while. Because because it's a fun game to just relax and mess around. It's like, yeah, there's Black Ops 7, but it looks kind of generic to me. If I were to get a game, it would be Battlefield 6, not Black Ops 7, because Black Ops, the Black Ops series, they look basically all the same now. Not that they didn't before, but now it looks really the same. And I think that I just think that it doesn't hold up. Other people can like it, and I understand why. It's because Call of Duty is it's a fan favorite. It sold 500 million copies. But yeah, I'm doing it for a reason. Let's see. Oh yeah, it was actually thundering and raining very hard earlier. It was nice. I actually kind of miss it. But that's why I put some thunder, like lightning and rain in the background, so that people can allow it, enjoy it more. So let's see. Um, okay. Uh, I don't know which one I want to go on. Um, Maybe this one. Yeah. All right. So I should start to get into all the points. I'll, I'll try to keep it. I'll try to keep it concise, but I want to go into at least a little bit of detail. So the first point is I typed out, I said I wanted to talk about how many people take the beliefs out of context. So this is stuff like, for example, the LDS Church is racist due to some scriptures said in the Book of Mormon that say that all like black people are cursed, which can't be the case because if black people are cursed, um, it doesn't make any sense. So black people can't really be cursed, uh, because for one, if the Latter Day Saints, Mormon, Church of Jesus Christ Church actually thought that, then why were they allowed to take place? Why were they allowed to take place in the plan of salvation? It doesn't make any sense because if God is all powerful and all knowing, he he wouldn't allow black people to take place in the first place. So that can't exactly be completely correct. The other one is, before I move on, is how we think, because I'm a LDS also, how we think that like the Lamanites are, how we think that the Lamanites are, um, we think like how we think that the Lamanites are cursed due to the black skin, but that's not true either. The black skin uh, was not the curse. It was being separated from God. And the reason why it can't be the black curse, can't be the curse, is because, again, why would God allow his own creation to exist as a human if he already knew that black people are cursed? It doesn't make any sense. And the Nephites and Lamanites, the Lamanites were blessed later after the Nephites, and so that doesn't make much sense either because the Lamanites who had the dark skin got blessed more than the Nephites. So that can't. How is that the case? It's because it doesn't make any sense consistency wise. And the thing about the priesthood, how black people weren't allowed to get the priesthood until like the 1970s. For one, Elijah Abel got the priesthood and got baptized by Joseph Smith in the 1800s. So that's an outlier. And also the other thing that people miss is that it was I would say that the justification is that it was just the climate at the time and the church was very small. So, but even if you want to say it is racist for them to do that, um, black people were still allowed to be members um, on day one. So I don't think the debunks against it hold much water. Um, no, black people are not cursed in the LDS Church. Uh, so the next point here is that um, how I said that how perhaps Latter-day Saints LDS can argue much better without fallacies. So this is the where I critique the like a lot of the Mormon members and even the church leadership. For example, we say that the LDS Church, uh, we say stuff like, um, well, the Trinity is not in the Bible, so therefore it can't allude to the Trinity, or God can't be a Trinity, which I don't think that's the case. Just because the Bible doesn't say something or allude to something doesn't mean that it's not alluding to it, or on the flip side, that just because there's something in the Bible doesn't mean that's actually what it meant. So for example, Jesus said, if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off. However, he's being something called hyperbolic, which means he's not saying to literally cut off your right hand. He's saying that because of the severity of it, he's not saying to literally do it. And that's the thing that many LDS I think don't understand, is that they do the word concept fallacy, where because it's not said in the way that explicitly says it, means it's not alluding to that. Well, for another thing is that the Bible doesn't directly say Jesus Christ is God, or it doesn't even directly say, have Jesus himself saying, I am God. Does that mean he's not God because he doesn't say it? So I think many LDS could work on not being cornered by our own fallacies, because otherwise you're just going to get steamrolled and you're going to be taken out of context or take things out of context. And so a lot of LDS just need to, I think, be better prepared for that. The third one is potential contradictory stuff in Latter-day Saint scriptures versus the Bible and how to square them. So, for example, many in the Latter-day Saints believes that the Bible and the Book of Mormon, they don't contradict. But if you're not a member, you would say that the Latter-day Saints scriptures and the Bible would contradict each other, which is why many people believe that they can't go together. And I'll give you an example. The Bible, there's a verse where it alludes to the fact that, once the apostles die, there can't be any more prophets because, there can't be an increase. There can't be any more revelation. There can't be any more scripture added to that. And because many, I think, Latter-day Saints don't know how to defend it, they would just say, well, we believe Joseph Smith because he is a prophet sent by God, but that is what you call circular, because you're just saying that you're correct because such so and so was given divine revelation from God without justification, without realizing that that's not a justification of the claim. That's just you espousing that it was already the case. And then it's like, how do you know that Joseph Smith wasn't just a fraud? How do you know that Joseph Smith didn't just do forgery? And when people say, well, why should you follow Joseph Smith? Most Latter-day Saints, I think, would just say, well, because he was given revelation by God and he was chosen by God to give out revelation, and by Joseph Smith, like by himself, and to start a church, even though it says in the Bible that there can't be more scripture added. And I think a lot of Latter-day Saints get stuck in that. So the thing that I would say as a Latter-day Saint myself, I would say that just because you can reveal more scripture without adding to it, you can reveal more context for what the Bible is seemingly vague at. For example, Corinthians, it says the sun, the moon, and the stars, and a lot of people don't know what that means because each differ in the glory of resurrection and the glory of essentially God. But the issue then becomes is like the Bible doesn't go into more detail about what those glories are. And I would say that the Latter-day Saint Church has, I think, the best and most consistent explanation, because the sun, the moon, and the stars verse in Corinthians could just relate to the three kingdoms of heaven and glory in the Latter-day Saint Church. So I would say that the Latter-day Saint Church, if you can argue for the sun, the moon, and the stars, and compare them to the sun, the moon, and the stars, and the three kingdoms of glory in the Mormon Church called the celestial, telestial, and terrestrial, I think that it is the best explanation, because it still explains that it would still explain that the three it wouldn't contradict, and it would just add, it would reveal more to scripture without technically adding to it. It would basically galvanize it and harmonize it, but many Latter-day Saints don't seem to think about it in that way. So the next point is that many Latter-day Saint Mormon people just take things hyper literally. Not everything Jesus said is meant to be hyper literal. So for basically what I'm restating as to the points before, when Jesus says to cut off your hand because you've sinned, he doesn't mean he wants you to literally do that. He just means to the severity. And when Jesus Christ says that no man knows, not even the Son knows, doesn't mean he doesn't know when he's coming back. It just means as a human, when he set aside his godhood to come down, because he emptied himself, kenosis, and in the Orthodox Church, as it would say, that he is technically correct that he doesn't know the day nor the hour he's coming back, but he's only saying that because he essentially nerfed himself. He made himself level 1 on Dark Souls, a new game on the highest difficulty, and he had to learn the meta without having like guides and stuff. He didn't have the internet or things to look up. He had to do it like basically completely on his own intuition, and he had to relearn things he already knew because he set aside his godhood when he didn't really have to. And so, not everything is Jesus said is meant to be taken hyper literally, as some LDS think, which is why they get hung up. So the next point is when people say many of the Latter-day Saint members think of God the Father used to be an exalted person or human, and how I don't think many Latter-day Saint know how to deal with it or just shift it to Jesus. So many Latter-day Saints get cornered by this. Will say stuff like, Latter-day Saints, they're like, whenever they'll ask a question about how from like different like members, they'll shift the burden to Jesus, and they think that, oh well, God, like Jesus Christ is God, and because he became human, therefore Jesus Christ, he became a human. But the problem is that they didn't ask about the Son of God or God the Son. They asked about the Father. And in many instances, because we believe that God the Father did become a human, but not particularly in the same way. At least I don't think so. I call myself a rebel Mormon because I don't always agree with the leadership or the interpretation of other members. It basically says that God the Father was a human and had a body, but he wasn't human in the same way. I just say that God the Father was an exalted human, and he didn't go through the same process that Jesus went as a human. Unless you want to argue that God the Father became human the same time his Son did, which actually could have been the case, but even if it wasn't, I just say that God the Father, he appeared to Joseph Smith as a human, but that doesn't mean that it's actually the true form of God, because the true form of God might not be able to be comprehended, because even the Bible says no one has seen God at any time yet except through the Son that reveals himself to him, which is another kind of big deal, because how did Joseph Smith see God the Father if Jesus said no one can see God? Well, because God the Father as an exalted human being is just, I would say, is an avatar of God. It's still fully God, but it's an avatar of God so that people won't like automatically like die or get like a brain freeze or something like that. But it's just an avatar. An exalted body is still not the fullness of God, because Joseph Smith still had to be transfigured, which is what, because if you were in the presence of God, you would go mad or die, because his glory is so great that being in the presence, you have to be transfigured or transformed in some way. So Joseph Smith wasn't seeing God in all of his glory. I mean, he was, but he was seeing the avatar glory of God, the exalted glory of God and not all of God, I would say. So that's how I would spin that. But many LDS, yet again, don't know how to handle it. Um, so the next point, the next point here is that how even if the Trinity isn't in the Bible, doesn't negate the claim. The Bible not saying something doesn't mean it doesn't allude to it, which I'll just touch on fairly briefly because I did before. That yeah, just because something is not said in a certain way doesn't mean it's not alluding to that, and just because the Bible says something doesn't mean it wants you to take it hyper literally. Um, as I've said before, not everything Jesus said is supposed to be taken literally, but you know, many people do that and then they lose the context entirely because you need to at some point you need to read the entire context and interpret it correctly. Otherwise, you're going to run into contradictions that aren't uh, that you won't get anywhere. So you need to have a higher level of thinking and understanding. Um, so the next point would be how among more like how LDS think black people are cursed when that's not the case true either. Oh yeah, before I move on to the next point, I want to talk about the Cainite stuff. The 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 body of Cain or the Cainites. How black people, and I'll debunk this too. How black people in the Bible, due to the being the descendants of Cain, are um, therefore they are um, because if they are descendants of Cain, they are cursed due to the lineage of Cain. But that can't be true either because again, it falls into the same issue as why would God create his own creation to curse it? But you could say that about a lot of different things either. Um, it doesn't mean much because if God created the Cain people out of love, then it means that God doesn't think they're completely a curse, even if people say that, because people of all nations and beliefs and kinds will go to Christ. That includes black people. So that argument, it just doesn't make sense. The next point is how the cycle of gods, even if true, doesn't negate the external God. However, I don't think there being gods before the Trinity or Godhead makes much sense. So yeah, this is just going to go into how, because many Latter-day Saints, now I don't believe it, but many Latter-day Saints, they say stuff like there's a cycle of gods due to like intelligence being eternal or matter being eternal, so therefore something that's eternal must be God. But I don't think that's the case either because, even if something is external and can't be created by God, doesn't mean it can use God the same way that God uses logic, math, and stuff like that to get universals, because a materialistic universe that's determined basically means you can't have justification. All you have is pragmatic. But if all you have is pragmatism, due to the inability of logic being able to love or have self-awareness or even know what it's doing, basically means that either everything is justified or nothing is true or both, and that there's just no way to know um, that you can actually have a you can have a you can't know things. You can't say, for example, well, morality exists outside of God, because even if that were the case, and let's just grant it for the sake of it, that doesn't mean anything from a finite standpoint, because you don't have a justification for claims. You can't actually know that what you're saying is valid and not determined other than from inside of your head. And even then, you can't prove that the mind is coherent enough or consistent enough to say that morals and logic can exist outside of God objectively, because if God is external and if God is eternal and intelligence is eternal and logic is eternal and math is eternal and everything is eternal in some way, even as just a concept to God, and yet God can affect let me put it like this: if God can affect reality in a way to where reality can't affect God, and God can be the objective justification and objective pragmatism that logic can't, because logic can't give you justification, it can't give you a moral ought, or it can just give you an is, like David Hume says, then ultimately God is greater, because God can do something that even objective logic cannot do. Even something like math can't give you a justification. Math can't explain, for example, why 2 plus 2 always being 4 is why murder is wrong. It's like, how can 2 plus 2 always being 4, even if it's logically consistent and true, how does that get you to how murder is objectively bad? And it can't. No amount of logic consistency can give you an objective to why murder is wrong or bad, other than, again, appealing to a finite, subjective, arbitrary human mind that can't even justify what a mind is, other than that you use it, but it doesn't give justification to why you ought to follow something over something else. Because, as I've said many times before, all actions are equal. There is no there is no justification for an action or a claim other than anything else, because you're just presupposing that you're correct, while at the same time saying that the human mind is finite, and that seems very contradictory. It's not consistent, it's not coherent. And we're done with, okay, that's done with that. Done loading now. Kinda took a while, but hey, that's okay. I'm having fun talking about this. What's the other one? Oh yeah, okay, so I went through the cycle of gods. Okay, the next point is how God being above logic makes sense, and that God has to be able to use logic in a way that logic can't account for morals in a objective way, and that something being consistent logically can't give justification for why something is bad. Reality, math, logic, universals, and more can't give a why. So as I said before many times, as I said before, especially in the claims, um, there's just no way for reality, if it is logically determined, to give a justification for claims other than saying, well, it just is. Um, but saying something just is, it still doesn't mean anything. It's like, oh well, it just is the case, uh, because we use them and it works. But what works, if it is arbitrary, uh, then it still doesn't mean anything, because saying that, oh well, things just are, so therefore uh, things just have to be the case because we just use them. But just using something doesn't mean we ought to do it, or we ought to like live that way. Well, you could, for example, just say all people dying is pragmatic. Why? Because if all humans are dead, you stop suffering, it's pragmatic, it's quicker, and you can't tell me why human existence, or uh, why human exists. Nobody can tell me objectively from a deterministic standpoint to why living is good, or why objectively, nor can it explain why that not, well, kind of lost my train of thought, but no, it can't explain why human existence, or a human flourishing, or humans being good in any capacity uh, means, like, it doesn't give me an explanation as to why human flourishing is good, other than, well, we like to live, and we should live because humans have an innate, a bit like we have an innate ability to um, want to live so that we can flourish. But then you have to get into why human flourishing is good, and it goes into a cycle of non almost to nonsensicalism, because there is no justification to why one action is better than the other. It just is, and it's just based on preference. What Andrew Wilson said to Diddley, and what he said about like what Jay Dyer says, they all say that that there is no reason to why human flourishing, or human flourishing, or humans living is good, especially if we all die anyway. It's like, okay, you don't like it. Well, that's just a preference you have. Who cares? And what makes your preference more substantial than mine if they're all basically all actions are equalized, all presuppositions are equalized, all worldviews are equalized, because you don't have to be coherent. You just can be arbitrary, and that's that. So there is no moral objective reason to why something is better than something else, other than the person's preference, because it's all relative. It's all relative, man. It doesn't really mean anything. Um, so yeah, I think I rambled on long enough. Uh, just like moral relativity, like even the problem of evil doesn't mean anything, because from that standpoint, there is no evil. The only thing that you can say that I guess can justify anything else, because morals are basically non-existent other than what's in the mind, and it's finite, is forced doctrine. Forced doctrine is basically might makes right, and that's just the way it is. And if people want to impose their will, they can do that. And who are you to tell them that I'm wrong? You can't say that they're wrong because they use force doctrine uh, due to, um, and it's not even a logical inconsistency, it just is. Um, Human flourishing, though, is I think it's really bad saying that God is evil because he flooded the earth, or which were basically very wicked people. So he didn't do it for no reason, and he waited 400 years, by the way, um, to do it. The reason why he got rid of the people in the flood and did Sodom and Gomorrah is that those people were very, very wicked, very, very wicked. Like, we're talking about R word, grape, they were offering their children sacrifices. They were, they weren't just being bad, they stole like a candy bar, or, they didn't believe in God. That's not why God did it. It's because they did it after 400 years. Um, they were basically trying to justify wickedness, which they knew were wrong, even if they didn't believe in Jesus. God did. I don't think has much of a problem with that, but He does have a problem with hypocrites and people who can't justify their own hypocrisy, which nobody seems to can. They were self-righteous hypocrites and not consistent. Um, I don't think God likes that very much. And saying that God is a relativist because he appeals to his own relativity, so therefore we can't have objectiveness, is very funny because relativity basically means that we each can be our own objective moral standards in a subjective way. So you can't really say that even if God is an objective relativist, you can't actually say that God is doing anything wrong because it's all still relative. It's all still relativity. It doesn't mean anything. And if you try to say that, well, God's using his subjective relativity and his own mind to say that, well, um, he's wrong, or you're saying he's wrong or whatever, that still doesn't mean much of anything because relative subjective people try to think that, oh well, since everything is relative and subjective, I don't have to be consistent. But when pushed, people are not very good at being consistent with their own beliefs. But it's just funny because people who posit that everything is subjective and that there can be no objective morals are basically also saying that everything is subjective, but let me try to do it from a objective framework just because we use it. And the issue with that is, as I've said before, is that there is no way to know what the objective standard is. That, so for example, even if we posit that we ought to do something, and yes, not all oughts are moral claims, but then the issue you run into is that just saying that, oh well, we all do this, we all do that because it's intuition, seems it's like moral relativity, relativist want their cake and eat it too. They want everything to be subjective, relative, and arbitrary, and ultimately nothing matters. But then they want to posit that things matter, uh, that things matter, but it it matters in a way that doesn't make any sense because, as I've said before, what it like. Okay, for example, if you jump off a high cliff, there's a high chance you're going to objectively die. However, that still doesn't explain, like, even if something is objectively true, like in a is case, doesn't mean it's true in a objectively ought case. And then because by that standpoint, you're making your ought, you're making what is the case your moral foundation. And even if you say that again, and what we should ought to is because it's good for us, because it's pragmatic and it works, it's still begging the question because it still comes down to, well, why is basing morals, our morality on, why is basing our morality on what is the case better than what we should do when there's really no difference between the two other than just preference? Yes. So as I restate many times is that yes, you can use an is for a moral claim. It just doesn't mean anything because using something and something being the case in a pragmatic way, because we all agree that it's pragmatic and it's all good, it doesn't mean anything. For example, people shouldn't cut off their own arm because it's pragmatic to not cut off their arm. But why is it objectively bad from a moral standpoint to cut off your arm if you can still if you can still be functional, just not in the way you think it is? And what if someone wants to cut off their arm? You can't even say that cutting off their arm is inherently wrong. It's not objectively wrong from a moral standpoint. Now, maybe it's objectively wrong from a pragmatic standpoint, but as I've said, something being wrong from an objective standpoint isn't the same as something being objectively wrong from a moral standpoint. It's just not good enough. I think you need basically subjective oughts and subjective is don't work because pragmatism is good because it works and you don't need a justification, for example, to why you should brush your teeth. You should brush your teeth really because you don't want them to get worse. That's not a moral claim. You should brush your teeth because it's your preference and it's more effective than not brushing your teeth. You can, but that doesn't give us. But brushing your teeth is it's an object. You could make it into objective claim. You ought to do that, but that ought is not a moral justification. For example, why you shouldn't cut off your hand or your arm. So if you cut off your hand from a pragmatic standpoint, you should just say, I don't want to cut off my hand because I like having my hand. It would make me less useful than not having it. Therefore, I want to keep my hand. Whereas you could just make the moral argument that you shouldn't cut off your hand uh, because not only would God not like that, but you are doing something deeply damaging to your like not only psyche, but you are actually damaging your body, and that for you might like your morals, um, if they do like for example, let's say whatever your moral framework is, your having your hand is more morally better than it isn't, because whatever you think gave it to you, God, evolution, whatever created you, wouldn't you want to take care of your temple, your body, as I put it? So I say that, and the last thing is, I would say having an is because you just want to. For example, I would say eating a candy bar isn't inherent. I would say you're eating it not because it's really pragmatic, but and not because it's moral. You're just eating it, because you want to. And if you're eating a candy bar because you simply want to do it, it's not because you shouldn't like. It's not because you shouldn't eat candy, and it's not because you're not you're you're not eating it, or you're not eating it not because of some God telling you you shouldn't eat it, uh, because morally it'll make you it'll cause you to think about things that maybe you shouldn't, or it'll affect your sense of you know morality, or brainwash you. You're just eating it because you want to, and you think it tastes good. And I think that there's different there's different thoughts. There's the you should do you should do an ought, because it's pragmatic. You ought to do something because it's moral, and you can even say you ought to do something um, because a candy bar tastes good, and I ought to eat this candy bar uh, before it goes bad or melts or something. And I like to do it, so I ought to eat candy, and I ought to go to the store because I like candy and I think it tastes good. So I think there's different oughts and is, and they can be turned on. Like, I don't think all oughts are moral, and I don't think all is are pragmatic, but I think there are certain limitations. I think you need objective morals, you need objective oughts, and you in some way need objective freedom and free will. And that's kind of, I think, some people miss the ought of free will. Should humans have free will, or should they just have free will based on what somebody else, preferences, or what somebody else thinks we free will should be? In other words, should people have free will to do and like and say and think what they want based on some arbitrary standard that can't be justified by another person, which or people, which just appeal to consensus, which is a fallacy? Or should people be allowed to say what they want, make fools of themselves, even if God like doesn't particularly enjoy it, but God will allow it because He appreciates free will more than you even worshiping Him from a North standpoint or a pragmatic standpoint. And I think that I think a lot of people uh, miss they miss the free will part, because when people say they want a perfect world, or they appreciate free will, it's like, do they want a perfect world, or do they just want a perfect world for themselves. And I don't think they want a perfect world. I think they want a perfect world that they perceive as a perfect world, or a perfect world that is basically, again, arbitrary, changing, not consistent, not coherent, other than with basically what they based on what works, which is all preference. It's all relativity. It's all it's all just, matter. It's all actions. Um, and nobody can say for certain that like their preference is better. Um, because what is better is, it just goes based to the person, and there's no consistent logic. Um, it's not consistent. It's not coherent. It's not. It's not consistent with everything else they say. And so, yeah, I think that people, when they're cornered and trapped in their own contradiction, especially a logical one, and they're like in uh-oh land, they're basically toast, because then they just start to call you names, and they don't actually address the argument. They go into fallacies, they go into projection mode, and then it's basically over from there. You've already destroyed their worldview. They can only appeal to contradictions. There's just nothing else to be there, I think. Oh, hey, Di. What's up? Uh, I'm doing well. I'm doing well, man. I'm just live streaming some Call of Duty while rambling about like philosophy and metaphysics and stuff. But I don't know. I think a lot of people, they, for some reason, I think a lot of people, they they try to be a self-righteous person while not realizing that everything they're doing is not, like, it's all arbitrary. Like, they can't even say what self-righteous actually means, because the word righteous, it alludes to something that is, it's still not coherent to whatever they think it is. Like, righteous, what is righteous? From a person's, like, what is righteous from a relative standpoint? Like, the word righteous, like, people thought Hassan was righteous, and maybe he's not. But that's why a lot of people don't want to debate, because most of the time when they try to debate, or they try to defend their worldviews, most of the time they can't actually do it, which is why people like Andrew Wilson are able to, like, basically almost like win people over every time, because they're not consistent. Uh, um, oh yeah, what was I gonna talk about? Oh, it's hard for me to keep up. Uh, I'm glad you're relaxing, Di. Thank you for sounding relaxing. I don't know. I think my voice is kind of, well, maybe it is weird. I don't know. Another thing. What was the other point? Oh yeah. So as an LDS, I don't believe God created the universe out of nothing. Now that doesn't mean that I don't think he could. Like, what am I saying? I'm saying that I don't think he couldn't. I just don't think he. I don't think he did. I think that God could create the universe out of nothing, because I do believe God can do logical contradictions. Because there's no way, as a finite person, you can say for certain what God can or can't do. Um, Especially when that your logic of God, that the logic of humans might not be the same logic for as God, like does it or entails it. So logic for us doesn't mean logic for doesn't mean that God's a lot like his logic and our logic might not mean the same thing. A lot of people, I think, miss they 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 basically they think that God can't create a married bachelor, which I don't think is untrue. I think God can make a married bachelor. I also think that God can make a square circle. And I'll explain why I think this could be the case. The reason why I think God can make a square circle is very simple. Is because just because it doesn't make sense to us doesn't mean it can't make sense to God. And to say, well, oh, like, oh, we can't envision a square circle, so therefore God can't, I think it's a bad argument because it comes back from the argument of incredulity, meaning that you're just saying it can't be the case because I don't believe it because it doesn't make sense to me. Well, a lot of things about God don't make sense. Doesn't mean he can't do them. I think it just means that uh, God doesn't. I just think that it means that God doesn't have to. He doesn't have to be logical in the same way that humans do because human minds and understanding are finite. So therefore, you could just say that human minds can't actually perceive logic the same way that God perceives it. For example, humans can't even say for certain if can know if there we can't know if there's not higher dimensional math. It's like how do you know that there isn't higher dimensional math somewhere that we don't know about but we don't have access to? And saying that uh, we can't envision it so God can't, I think it's a very bad claim because then it basically you have to also say that oh well what about a lot of other things that are logical contradictions? For example, can regular humans walk on water? No, they can't. um that's not a logical contradiction because humans, a human walking on water is violating the laws of physics. um I just think it's a really bad argument to say God can't do something because we don't understand it. Yeah, you can't understand all of reality because you're a finite human being. That doesn't mean that God can't, you know, that doesn't mean that God can't do stuff that we find logically unviable. Yeah, our mind, yeah, you're right, Dai. Our minds are limited. And I try to tell people this. I try to tell other LDS this. In fact, I might just have to get on I might have to get on the Twitter space and just go ham and tell people that, hey, you guys aren't like, you know, a lot of people, even from my own beliefs and group, they're still not consistent either. But that doesn't mean that I disagree with everything. I just think that the logic here is it it's just not valid. Um, but yeah, basically going back to the point I was saying before, just because I don't think God made the universe ex nihilo doesn't mean I don't think he can't do it. I just don't think he did. And just because a square circle can't exist in a logical way doesn't mean it can't exist as a concept. And it certainly doesn't mean that it can't exist in a way um, that we can understand it. Just because something doesn't make sense to us logically doesn't mean it can't make sense to God logically. And unfortunately, a lot of people, I don't think, understand it. But, oh well. Okay, I gotta get out of that lobby. It's kind of laggy. And I can customize my own class. But, uh, I used to didn't even do commentary like this until like a year, till like a month ago, 2 months ago, or 2 months ago. And maybe that's a good thing, because I think that I don't know. I think that like a square circle can exist in the concept. Like, for example, if I ask someone, does a concept exist? And it's like, well, yeah, they would say a concept exists. So then I would ask them, does a square circle exist? And they would say no. And then I could just respond with, well, how do you know a concept doesn't exist? Like a square circle, you saying a square circle can't exist as a concept doesn't mean I'm saying it can't exist. Like, it can exist in a way that isn't, it's not, it's not contradictory, because a square circle can exist as a concept in the mind, even if it doesn't make any sense. Okay. Like, even if it doesn't make sense in the mind, doesn't mean it can't exist. Sorry about that. I think maybe that was Queso that yelled. Somebody yelled in the background. Well, good thing I have it on lower than usual sound. But yeah, as I was saying, what was I saying before? Oh yeah, just because a concept to us can exist in the mind, even if it can't logically exist in the way we think it can, doesn't mean that it can't exist. Because, for example, I could just turn around and say that logic can exist. Like, for example, logical contradictions can exist. They can exist in a way that we may not be able to comprehend. A married bachelor does exist. It's called Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is a married bachelor. Jesus Christ is a single person, I believe, but he's married to the church, and therefore you have your married bachelor. Jesus Christ is single. As far as I'm concerned, he didn't get married. He didn't have children, at least not in the normal way, but he was a married bachelor because he's married to the church and he's married to me. Me and Jesus are married. So yeah, uh, I don't know. I think a lot of LDS could just. I think they could become better debaters if they just like uh, looked back and listened to the if they just like did a man, it's kind of hard to concentrate, but it's like it just if they just looked back and um, looked at the chinks in the armor. It's like in order to get better at defending your worldview, you have to look at the weak points and then get better at them. Otherwise, people can just keep like messing you up on your worldview, and I think that's not. I think that's not a good thing. Well, maybe it's not a good thing, but I think people know what I'm saying. Look, I went positive somehow. Yeah, I am trash. I do kind of miss the lobbies of Modern Warfare 2, though. Um, well, let's see. What was the next point on here? Oh yeah, how can God do logical contradiction because the human mind can't understand what knowledge looks like from God's perspective. Therefore, saying what God can or can't do is impossible from a human standpoint. It's like, yeah, that's basically it. You can't really say for certain what God can and can't do, especially from a relative, arbitrary, subjective standpoint, because it's still going back to the human mind, which is finite, limited, and you can't even say what is good or what's bad. So I'll just bring up this. People who say that anime is satanic because it promotes degeneracy, anime will lead to people doing bad stuff. That can't actually be demonstrated either. It's a fallacy to assume that just because someone has weird fantasies about fiction doesn't mean they'll do it in real life. In fact, it's probably the complete opposite. People who are weird about fiction won't be weird in real life, and if there is a correlation, it's probably circumstantial correlation. There is no way that people can say that God, that anime anime will affect people in the same way that there's no way you can blame anime for the ills of like fallen man, because man did it. Like, a lot of people don't seem to understand it. Boomers don't. Is that man was doing bad things long before anime was a thing. So they would have to explain all the bad things that man did. It's like, how do you explain Sodom and Gomorrah or the flood or anything else of that stature that humans did before anime was the thing? How do you explain unit unit 731 or whatever? And these people who are anti-anime, they're not anti-anime probably because they 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 don't think it's anti-anime, probably because they have some link to stand on. They're probably thinking it's anti-anime because they're probably anti-anime because anime, they don't understand it, or it promotes, a lot of anime promotes wholesome stuff. In fact, a lot of anime, many times, they actually pay homage to Jesus Christ. A lot of anime is also pro-family. A lot of anime isn't actually even that bad. And I say being weird about anime isn't the same as being weird about stuff in real life. And if anime causes someone to want to act in a certain way, Is it the anime or is it something else? I don't think it's the anime. I think it's a red herring to say, oh, anime causes this, anime causes that. But I've been watching anime since like, I don't know, 5 years old or something, and it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything. It's just something to blame. It's just something to blame because they can't blame their own thing. They don't want to blame their own. They don't want to blame their own inadequacy. They don't want to blame their own. They don't want to blame. They don't want to blame their own lack of moral values. They just want to say, "You're wrong, and here's why you're wrong." But I'm not going to offer a justification for why you're wrong. I'm just going to say, "You're wrong. Anime is stupid. It sucks, and it's not very good." When the reality is, they're just hating anime uh, because they have nothing else to harp on. They're trying to find a connection or correlation that's not even there. Anime is a lot more wholesome than a lot of Western stuff, but people will accept Western stuff just because it's like on Netflix. And I don't hate Netflix, but a lot of the stuff on Netflix is bad, especially cuties. It's like cuties, like you draw the line at anime, but cutie gets a pass. That like these people are kind of dumb. They're kind of stupid. But oh well. But what do I know? I'm just a dumb, odious, random emo brown person who doesn't actually know um, much of anything. Maybe I'm not very good at debate because I keep rambling about the same points over and over and over again. But I need to do more research and stuff. Who knows? What? Hmm. I didn't get him. Oh well. It's too bad. So what was the other point? Okay, so how God can do a logical contradiction, can do a human. Okay, so I already went through that standpoint. So the other point is not being able to understand a point doesn't mean that it's just word salad. For example, asking for a syllogism doesn't mean the point is invalid. However, asking for a syllogism might be a trap. Uh, so something being like, for example, not every hard explanation, for example, means it's word salad. It just means you're trying to clarify what you're restating. So, for example, I think a lot of what Peterson says, and what I say occasionally is frankly just word salad, because we ramble on and on without getting to much of a point. Now, I would say that it doesn't make the points invalid necessarily, because complex explanations doesn't mean it's word salad. It just means that some points might not be able to be clarified in one statement or one claim without clarifying the claim that comes after, which is why debate and semantics are very important into what we're talking about, because otherwise we'll get lost and basically get lost in the sauce. And I think Jordan Peterson is probably the worst perpetrator of it. I hope he can be okay, and may God bless him. And even though he doesn't like me very much. I hope Jordan Peterson is okay, but um, you see a lot of the same stuff in history. A lot of stuff in history, like people who worship history or worship the past, even though it wasn't exactly the best either. They worship the history, they worship the past, they worship history, or they even worship stuff like they idolize politicians, they worship uh, politics, not realizing that when they're pinned down on like on things that are not consistent, they just call you names. For example, if I say a lot of people who believe in Hitler, they think he's the Great White Hope, they'll come out and say he was white first, even though he had non-white people in the military. He did the Havara Agreement with Jews, which is very strange because that could have actually helped create the modern state Israel, which many of them don't like. But whenever you bring this up, they say that either you're a Jew, you're an N, or you're just incompetent, but they can't actually offer a debunk or a rebuttal to it, so they just go into that. The other one is you could just, if you bring up how Hitler, you know, he thought Polish people weren't white or they weren't worthy of of being alive or something, that he would just kill them, um, because I guess Polish people don't make the cut of being white for him, even though Polish people are white and were white, and he killed his own people. So there's already inconsistency from that standpoint. And it gets worse. And I don't think he was the evilest person in the world, but clearly there's a lot of stuff it's not consistent with what they like say it is. For example, um, Action. There was something called the T4 Action um, thing in Nazi Germany, and this was a sterilization of unwanted German people. And yes, he did kill his own people. He did kill white people. Um, that if you were disabled or you weren't useful to him, he would kill you. So, so basically, um, he would appreciate you. But when people say, "Oh, well, Hitler cared about his own people," I'm not sure he completely cared about his own people. The way these, I guess, online Nazis say he would, because they don't argue in good faith, and when they're called out on this, as I've said before, they'll just call you names, which I'm fine with. It doesn't offend me. I don't care. I don't get offended. I don't take things personally. I just say how I feel, and you know, you can't. That's the end of it. You shouldn't bring emotions into. You shouldn't bring emotions into a debate, or try not to, even if you believe it, because then you can basically be controlled by whatever your emotions is, and you're not being consistent even with yourself. So I would try to keep emotions out of it. But yeah, when you call them out, many of them are not consistent. In fact, many of them actually aren't even consistent in, private DMs. Many will say, "Oh, hey, Hitler," who I guess is basically God to them. Many will say, "Oh, I can just race mix," and I understand the hesitance of race mixing. I, as a black person, don't want to race mix either, but I don't really, marriage isn't in the cards for me. It's just my preference, not it's just my preference not to get married, but um, I don't know. I I think many of these people, I think many of those people, they 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 aren't very. I don't know how to state this. I think they're not very, as I've said before, they're not very consistent. When called out on it, when the, as they're basically a lot like what I've said before. They're self-righteous hypocrites who are not consistent or not coherent because they get called out on their own hypocrisy. Um, but when called out, they they don't know how to handle it, so they just call you names because from the outset they are losing. They are losing a losing battle. They know they can't. They know they can't win it. So what do? They project. They basically always say that it's all projection. They they just don't know how to they don't know how to get out of their own cognitive dissonance because they don't know how to get out of their own way. They 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 don't know how to get out of their own way. They don't know how to get out of their they don't know how to get out of their own way. They don't know how to get out of their own cognitive dissonance, as I've said before. They don't even know how to argue against their own weak points. And this is because they don't want to accept that Hitler wasn't as exactly as consistent as they think. Yes, I don't think he was the mean old boogeyman that mainstream Jews make him out to be, but I don't think he was consistent either because if Hitler was consistent the way people think he was, why is it the case that Hitler himself um, had non-white people in it? Why did he make a pact with Jews? Why did he have non-white people in his army? And why did Hitler go up to, Jesse Owens and he said, oh, why at least he shook his hand and Jesse Owens said, Hitler never stubbed me. Um, a lot of people say, well, that's due to Mein Kampf. So therefore, because what's said in Mein Kampf and, Hitler's own book, he didn't like other races. And yet he allowed other races into his own army, which he was commanded to. And also, it's just funny because a lot of people who also say, oh, well, Hitler, he was the greatest guy. He's such a great guy. Only when I get cornered. He also did drugs. He was not physically and mentally the best. He made a lot of mistakes in the war that basically cost him. He did, I understand he had to make he had to do some wars. He had to do some wars for some reason, but uh, there's also a there is also a kind of an ironic twist of fate because now he he it's like we don't even know why Hitler I guess was very badly he took drugs or something. I just think it's funny because I don't know. I truly believe that some Hitler people see him as God. They say they don't worship him as God, but I think based on what they based on what they like say about him, he's basically God to them. In fact, I don't think the Nazis were bad people. I don't think they were necessarily good people. I think in many ways they cared about their own people, but a lot of what, but even if you wanted to grant they cared about their own people, a lot of the reason why I think they cared about their own people uh, is because they were useful to them. Um, that's why they did the T4 thing. That's why they killed the Poles, because if you weren't useful to them, they they would just kill you, sterilize you, and it's still ironic because Hitler himself wasn't the bastion of he wasn't the bastion of health. He wasn't the bastion of consistency. Um, I don't think he was the great white hope that people think he was. He did a deal with the Jews. He, killed his own people. He allowed non-white people. He had commanders that were actually probably Jewish. In many pictures, dare I say, he does look Jewish. He has a long nose. He wasn't very healthy. A lot of Hitler, uh, I think, is just gaslit by his own people. Two like contradict, like two opposites can be true at different times. So I can say he cared about people, but I can also say he only cared about people if he were useful to him, and that there's no way to know if he truly cared as much as Hitler worshippers think. And even then, whether he was Christian or not, because again, this is another contention that we might not know about, is that Hitler was a Christian. Hitler was a Christian before. He was a Christian long before. Hitler was a Christian. At least growing up, I think he was Catholic, and I guess apparently he got out of that. He got out of the Christian state. Apparently, he got out of the Christian state, but then because he said, well, Christianity is weak, which is ironic because he, kind of just shot himself in the head after. And so, I think it's very weird. I think it's very weird how people can say, "Oh, Hitler, he was so great. He was so consistent. Look how good he is." And then it turns out that he wasn't as good as they think, and then it was over for Hitler after. It was basically over for Hitler after he realized that it was over for Hitler because then he realized that everything that Hitler is saying, or a lot of things that Hitler was saying, were not consistent with what people think. And so it's just it's uber funny when people think that they can that people can get when people think that they can get when people think that they can just get you off your rocker because if we call people names, we don't have to be consistent with our worldviews, nor do we have to answer to them, nor do we have to give justification for them, and it's pretty hilarious because they're basically forfeiting uh, almost the match. They're almost forfeiting the entire the entire debate right there to just say, "Oh wow, look at what we're doing." It's like, okay, yeah, look at what you're doing. You're being not consistent. You're being a self-righteous hypocrite. You can't tell me what bad means except that it's your preference. And so you kind of can just ask him, well, why is all people dying a bad thing? Well, human survival is good, and human survival is necessary because we like to flourish. So human survival is good uh, because it causes us to survive, but that's just pushing it down the road. Why is human survival good, other than not human survival good? You know, if you want to be pragmatic, just kill yourself, and then there's no you to worry about. There's no there is no need to continue to do things, especially if everything like basically how can Nazis, and I'm not saying you know they're wrong because oh they're wrong from a moral standpoint because I think history is lied about, but it's more fundamental I would say because how does a Nazi say, or how does a white person say from an objective standpoint that something is better than something else other than their own preference and other than saying, well, it works, but ultimately everything ends the same way, and that way is death. There is ultimately no reason to prefer one thing over the other, even if even if you have a utopia that works and is consistent and that you like Hyperborea or Wakanda. This goes for every group and basically every race because everything is just preference on everything else, and there's no reason to why something is better than something else. It's all preference, and to say that um, that your society is better than something else because it works. Well, that's just a preference you have. It's all emotional appeal. It doesn't mean anything, and well, it just doesn't work. It doesn't work. So I would be very surprised if I would be very surprised if it can if people can actually be consistent, but most of the time they can't, and that's really the issue. Is if you have no justification, if you don't need justification, and if you don't need to be consistent with that justification because everything is just based on it's just based on the beholder, and everything is justified by based on what works. But if that's arbitrary, there's still no reason to say you prefer one or the other, one over the other one. It's all arbitrary, man. I don't know. I'm restating everything that I'm saying. Maybe I'm just determined to say it, but um, but I don't know. I don't know. Like, I would talk about something else, but there's just not a lot that interests me in life. I'm interested in philosophy. I'm interested in theology. I'm interested in why people believe what they believe. I'm interested in like if people can if people can justify their own politics in terms of being able to justify contradictions. I'm interested in power scaling, and I'm interested in learning, and I'm also interested in a lot like AI and stuff, and because I love technology. I'm a Christian, LDS, who thinks Jesus is God, but I also love technology. I think technology is a gift from God. I think technology isn't the Antichrist. I think a lot of things are not the Antichrist. And a lot of people say, well, I can predict the rapture. Even though Jesus said, don't try to predict it. Uh, don't try to predict the rapture. Some people on my friends list, they'll have stuff like, oh, well, the rapture's going to begin such and such because of this date. It's like, um, I would say you can tell if it's getting closer, but that doesn't mean that you can pick out the exact date. It says that he will come as a thief in the night. And I think a lot of people um, misinterpret that. Now, I as an LDS think he'll come long before then, maybe, as Adam on Diamond. I think that Jesus will come as a separate event. I think that the second coming is also. I think there's a lot of stuff that'll happen. I think a lot of people are gonna be surprised. I think there has to be the second Jerusalem first, among other things at time. So I think there has to be, the temple has to be rebuilt. There has to be another. There has to be the new Jerusalem. There has to be the new Jerusalem, new temple, and I think that that's absolutely fine too. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. So maybe to get in power scaling a little bit, there's a big difference between spatial dimensions and temporal dimensions. Temporal dimensions would be like time is the fourth dimension, versus the fourth dimension would be like a hypercube in terms of like spatial area, whether if it's infinite or finite. So for example, an infinite, so for example, like whether it's like infinite 3D or a finite temporal, like a finite spatial dimension, which means like a 3D dimensional, it has length, width, and height, length, width, height, volume. But then the fourth dimension would have all of those, but it would also have something called hypervolume, and hypervolume is basically it's like a cube within a cube, and there's more axes in a higher dimensional thing, a higher dimensional like being, or a higher dimensional framework. So it would still work. It's kind of like, for example, if I compared a 2D dimensional being versus a 3-dimensional being, like even if you stacked an infinite amount of 2D, infinite 2D would not get you to infinite like 3D, because you would still trying to be putting infinite number of squares trying to make a cube, and it doesn't work. Irrelevant is higher than out of boundless, because irrelevant basically means you go into almost make believe territory, uh, where not even math can calculate it. So, an irrelevant character I would say is higher than a boundless character, but a boundless character um, would probably be the highest other outside of omnipotent, which might not even exist in fiction because fiction is very big and it's kind of hard to um, it's it's hard to tell what fiction actually is, because I can create my own fiction that's not published, and therefore it can't account for my fiction. Um, it can only account for the infinite fictions within that fiction, but omnipotent might not be a thing in fiction because there's too many layers, there's a lot of contradictions, I think, that that isn't actually sound. So it's like kind of like a relevant speed. A relevant speed means you can be in two places at once, even if it doesn't really make logical sense. So, for example, if I wanted to be in the past and the future at the same time while simply moving, that wouldn't be a state of presence like omnipresence. That would be due to my sheer speed. That would be due to my sheer. Uh, that would just be due to how fast I was moving. It's the same thing, kind of with irrelevant. You would be irrelevant. You would be above the math tier, even the higher theoretical math like ZF, ZFC theory. It would be higher than the Aleph No or Aleph Cardinals. You basically wouldn't be able to even calculate it or comprehend it, because it would just be going into real life territory. Mm. So, yeah, I think, but basically, since boundless might be the highest, or maybe metafictional or extraversal, how would you be able to, like if you put two boundless characters or two like metafictional characters, against each other, how would you be able to tell which character, um, which character would be able to beat the other one? And I think it would just have to come down to cosmology, because once you get into stuff like irrelevant characters, extraversal characters, or metafictional characters, you're basically saying that they're above the math tiering system. Although I think irrelevant is actually higher than boundless, because boundless is still a tier even if it can't be measured, whereas irrelevant can't even be measured by the tiering system at all. And I put irrelevant higher than boundless. But an irrelevant character that's like real life would be a stronger character than an irrelevant character in fiction that encompasses infinity and even higher, like in Hilbert space, or instance, which can be a quantified, like limited level of of different dimensions, which is what a Hilbert space is. Basically, what it's supposed to do. But yeah, I think an irrelevant character that is real life, kind of like Jesus, is higher than an irrelevant character that's not like real life. So, for example, like Jesus Christ, who is an avatar of God, um, an avatar of himself. But even if he wasn't an avatar of God, an irrelevant character is infinitely greater than an irrelevant character in fiction because the irrelevant character in real life would be so much higher because an irrelevant character in fiction still needs real life to do anything or be anything at all. And that's why real life will always win out because a fictional character needs real life existence to be a thing, even if there's even if you ascribe it as boundless, if you ascribe it as metafictional, or if you ascribe it as irrelevant. God Fusion Goku can be highballed and maybe linked to a metafictional character because that metafictional character called God Fusion Goku was able to fuse with the audience and shake the chairs in our actual reality. However, that doesn't mean that God Fusion Goku as a metafictional character exists in our real life. It's just a representation of our real life that he exists in. Otherwise, you could argue that Bugs Bunny, if from Back in Action, is a real life character because he appeared in our real life character too, in our real life in the Looney Tunes Back in Action. Same thing with Daffy Duck. So if you want to go that far, but I would say God Fusion Goku still has the edge because God Fusion Goku was able to make the chairs shake in real life, which I would say even beats out fusing with the audience because fusing with the audience is still just a representation of a fictional real life a real life fictional a real life fictional a real life fictional representation of the audience but not being the actual audience, whereas shaking the chairs is probably just a higher feat because that's God Fusion Goku actually affecting the real life chairs without it being a representation of the real life, but actually doing it instead of just interacting with the real life representation of it. And so I think that there's a lot more meaning to God Fusion Goku being able to do that. But like I said before, just because even if God Fusion Goku shook the chairs and you want to use that as an argument for metafictional and being one of the strongest characters in fiction, that doesn't mean that God Fusion Goku is still real life. It just means he affected the chairs, but he still didn't become real life. So you could say that that might be the upper limit of what could be actually be achievable in a statement of like in a statement of what God Fusion Goku was able to do and accomplish. And so